Yeah, so Edward Watson. I'm a product marketing manager at VEEAM. Been at VEEAM now for 5 years, focusing on Office 365, and I work together with Karinne on spreading the good news for Office 365 backup. We've got a great presentation today, especially for those who are kind of, thinking about backing up M365 and beginning their journey to do so. Got some good, again, sort of advice and sort of a checklist as you're looking and evaluating third-party backup vendors, just some general advice on really what to look for. I think Karinne was sharing the presentation, but looks like she just left. So I think I'll go ahead and start sharing. So yeah, my apologies for that. Just go ahead and start here from the beginning. Okay, can you? Yeah, can you see my screen? Okay, Craig.
I can see it fine.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so in this checklist, we're also going to be taking a look at staples. I just in case you don't know staples, which I would doubt. But obviously they are a leading provider of workplace products, and this is specifically looking at the division in Europe that has over 10,000 employees and 9 million customers. So first, taking a look at the deployments, and this is, again, going to be a checklist as we go through, starting with as you're looking to deploy. Karinne, are you there? I think we might be having a little bit of technical difficulty with Karinne
there
right
she
now.
is.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Went to put myself in Do Not Disturb, and it closed Teams.
Ah.
All right, so are we on to the actual deployment types? Did you cover the staples section? Excellent. I actually cannot hear you, though, anymore, Edward.
Yes, we're on to the deployment types. Yeah.
All right. So having deployment flexibility gives you a lot of choices and helps you make something that makes sense to your business, starting with, say, an on-prem deployment versus if you want to put it into a public cloud and have it cost effective, like having options to offload that to, say, an object storage instead of having to use that expensive disk storage. Like, the flexibility within your deployment types allows you to migrate your data when it makes sense to your business. Maybe you start with a small on-prem type of deployment, and then you push off to a public cloud to take it out of your hands, or you decide in the end, I don't want to handle this as an IT department at all, and you move it to a backup as a service. But having that flexibility within your vendor and the option to change when it makes sense to your business is something that we definitely strive for and we recommend.
Yeah, and on the Staples side, they actually had 25 branch locations, but each of those locations actually had their own backup solution deployed. So their challenge was, look, we've got all these various deployments of backup solutions. Let's consolidate this down to one centralized solution where we can control all of our backup and recovery needs. So they were clearly a lot further along, but weren't necessarily managing it the most effectively, spending lots of time managing licenses, like managing various types of backups from various types of vendors. So they wanted to choose the best vendor that would match their needs.
And that brings us to backup storage flexibility. So having the ability to either use an object storage, which a lot of customers, it was a #1 request on our side. It seems like a lot of people do not want to bring that data back down on-prem. But having the flexibility to do that if you need it, because some compliance and regulations require you to have a copy of your data locally for anything that you have in the cloud. I know there's some European rules and some GDPR rules. Depending on how you have your GDPR written, you may need to do this. But having the flexibility to do that or send it up to your object storage of choice, giving like a separation of credentials by putting it into another subscription even, which is I know what I like to do in my own lab is I send this to a separate subscription, and in our next version, we've already announced the backup copy feature, which I'm putting into an additional subscription that's a cold storage, so I can have those additional administration and separation of that administration zones.
Yeah, and on the Staples side, again, they needed something scalable. You know, they have not just the small amount of users they were backing up, but they have, they're a massive conglomerate. So obviously they needed a solution that as they were wanting to protect more and more departments, they needed to be able to have a solution that would scale with them and do so affordingly. And on the topic of storage flexibility, they wanted to make sure they had a solution that was hardware neutral, meaning that if they chose to back up via AWS 1 year, Azure the next, or whatever storage they wanted to use, they could work with a backup vendor that integrated with all of those storage vendors, which obviously Veeam does very well. Many other vendors might not have the flexibility, so definitely caution you to ask the backup vendors you're evaluating, do you back up, do you allow that flexibility to move from one storage vendor to another without any penalties and have the infrastructure flexibility to do so. So very, very important questions to ask.
Yeah, in kind of addition to that statement, I don't personally expect any of what we call the tech giants to die or go away over the next couple of years, but there's definitely been a lot of consideration and factors about losing faith. Like, you've lost faith or possibly lost faith in one of the giants and you want to move from one to the other and having that flexibility. Or it's possible that they make a policy change that puts you in non-compliance for a certain regulation that you're required. Like Azure is getting rid of the Germany only data center, and that was a big compliance for GDPR for a lot of people in Germany. So what do? If your data is kind of just held up there, then you're not able to move across or have that flexibility. It can be a problem and a very costly problem. Also, taking in consideration a hybrid approach to your backup. So not necessarily just putting your data in separate places as a hybrid cloud solution or on-prem and in the cloud as a hybrid, but the source data itself. Making sure that you're able to handle an on-prem or migration situation. I know a lot of companies like to slowly push out the migration and do training in between of each of these individual departments, instead of doing a hard cutover from an on-prem situation to a cloud organization, or some data never gets migrated at all. We're doing a little bit of SharePoint here forever, and we're just going to mail up those email. Well, you want to have a solution that has the flexibility to target or to back up from both of those target locations under a single infrastructure and interface. And then we have number 4 here, which is actually going to have the control of the backup scope. So kind of tail end of the hybrid situation, maybe you want to do cross backups. Anything that's still on-prem, you want to get up to the cloud to have a copy in the cloud. And everything that is currently residing in the cloud on the Microsoft 365 side, bringing that back down on-prem to still give you that little bit of feeling of control when you feel like you're giving up so much control by going to the cloud. Now, we know it's a fairly stable environment, but ransomware does hit. It's not just an on-prem problem. It's not just a problem with making sure that you lock down the credentials. A pivoting type of attack could compromise a low-end user and eventually make it to someone that has the authority to delete your data online, and it gives you a little bit of that control back. Then having an exclusion scope for each of your jobs. Maybe you want to back up every single SharePoint site to object storage except one. You're able to select your entire organization and back those all up and easily exclude one option instead of individually going through and having to select each account that you want to back up into each separate location. So the flexibility of having dynamic groups and Office 365 groups to control those backups, making sure you're asking the questions, how much flexibility do I have for selecting each of these objects, especially for tiered SLA?
Absolutely. So when it comes to scope, obviously very important. In Staples' case, they wanted to make sure they are backing up really their critical apps, right? That they were actually backing up 50 terabytes of O365 data, including 2,700 mailboxes on-prem. I think back to kind of the beginning when we talked about employment, making sure that, you know, whether you want to back up on premises or in the cloud, having options for where you store that data, where you deploy that data, very important. Also, I do want to mention that they were also able to back up and replicate the data. So we also have a backup and replication solution for VMs. So in this case, they were actually able to replicate 600 terabytes across 1,500 virtual machines and use the storage that worked for them from HPE Nimble Storage snapshots on-prem to Azure Blob, and even tier off that data as well for long-term storage via our scale-out backup repository to Azure Blob. So again, lots of different various implementations for various types of workloads for backup. I think you're muted, Karinne.
Yeah, I was going to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of our biggest success stories are around not just backing up a single application, but the flexibility to back up all of your workloads under a platform that gives you the same look and feel across the board, and the ability to use the same types of repository, the same data location, so you don't have this really weird data sprawl and application access sprawl.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. There's lots of vendors out there. They specialize on backing up VMs, or they specialize on backing up O365. If you have a platform that, regardless of whether it's Kubernetes, virtual, physical, cloud, you can back it all up, SaaS, IaaS, I think you're golden. So you got to make sure that, you know, if you are taking all your workloads seriously for backup, you know, look into a backup solution that really has that platform foundation.
I'm always amused when someone's asked me, so what do you guys actually back up? And I start listing it off, and I feel like I'm going on and on and on.
Right.
All right. Back to our checklist for 2022, and we specialize a lot in the Microsoft 365 side, me and Edward personally, not technically as a company, but me and Edward. And we did a lot around Teams. Now, Teams isn't a self-contained application. It's actually an abstraction layer for multiple backend data entities. And if you've ever had to manage Teams, you start to understand how many backend locations all of this data is being stored, pulled from, how do I restore it, how do I recover it, how do I even find it to begin with. And it starts off with how we have the Exchange online here, which is a lot to do with your contacts, your calendars, your meetings, and it holds some of your personal conversations between two data entities. Looking at SharePoint Online, that's going to be your Teams files, your tabs within there actually go to a SharePoint site on the back end. I recently had to clear that out because we ran out of space. OneDrive, or OneNote, excuse me, is saved for that specific SharePoint. OneNote is within that SharePoint site, which is that channel that you're working with inside the team, like those collaborative Teams locations. Then if you ever send a file to someone inside of Teams, like a personal file back and forth, that's actually getting routed through OneDrive for Business as well as the chats. Now there's this situation that's been happening over the last about year and a half where chat files have been migrating from the Exchange backend over to the OneDrive backend. It was supposed to be a clean cutover, but I think they've started to only slowly do that. Then your legacy is still in that Exchange side. So there's a lot of data sprawl, and they make changes, so sometimes even tracking down those data changes can be hard to know where to find the files.
Yeah, and you know, when it came to staples, and I think when it came to many, you know, many of our you know, organizations, that, you know, we actually really had to pivot very quickly during the pandemic. And I think, you know, Teams adoption obviously was top of mind. How can my workforce now work more effectively now that, you know, we're working remotely? And obviously for many it was, you know, kind of scrambling to get these Teams deployments up and running. And luckily for companies like Staples, yes, they could implement Teams very quickly, but also having that peace of mind that, yes, I can recover this data if I need to. And I think that's probably one of the most important takeaways for today is, you know, many of us have deployed Teams. The next question logically is, are we backing it up? And if we're not, making sure that we really leverage that purpose-built backup solution that's going to back up teams the right way, help us recover in the most efficient manner that we really can. So definitely a big takeaway from today's checklist.
So we covered a lot about the hybrid situations, making sure you're covering the applications and having a piece of software built for the application infrastructure that you're backing up. The next important questions you need to be asking is around your SLAs. Your RPOs and your RTOs, so your recovery point objectives, how often do you need to be backing up? Do you need it almost continuous? Do you need it pretty much kicking off as soon as it stopped in your infrastructure, or could you do it once a day? Do you only want to do it once a day, and having the flexibility to maybe have backup windows so it's not during production hours? You may not feel comfortable, especially if you're bringing that back down on-prem, making it so your remote workers can't connect in because you're doing a backup during the day. That's something you want to consider in there. And then your recovery time objectives, making sure that it is a fast backup. There are multiple hard line throttling rules that are in the Microsoft infrastructure, and if you don't have a backup software that's using backup auxiliary accounts that allow for that additional processing speed, you're just going to be completely tanked for what type of RPO, RTO that you can get. Make sure you're asking how fast can we do a proof of concept. Bring multiple vendors in and throw them side by side with help with that configuration and see who wins. See who can meet your expectations of the software. Then the next thing is it's all about recovery, and we strive to make sure we're talking about what kind of recovery options you can get, because to put it frankly, you do not get any type of traditional recovery options through the native protection tools that you see within the Microsoft 365 environment itself. So one of the biggest pulls is just getting a software that you don't have to go through 30 different steps to get a file back to just the original location. We're releasing a self-restore portal here within the quarter, so making sure you can give power to end users to take some of that load off of your primary infrastructure admins. Making sure you can do an export for compliance reason. We have so many different restore options through our platform that we've gotten to see all of the reasons why you're not just restoring in a raw data format either, making sure the backup software restores in a format that makes sense to the application, like exporting in MSG files or PST files for exchange, documents and libraries when you're working with SharePoint. You don't want to just get that raw data bit to try to manually back upload, and without all that metadata in the back end. It starts to become a huge data sprawl, and you start getting weird messages from Microsoft.
Yeah, and what Staples is actually leveraging, this is kind of how Veeam does it, and we have these powerful Veeam Explorer applications, and they're tailor-made for each of the main applications that we serve, whether that's Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. And really what those are going to give you is much more, basically very quick recovery granularity, and really allow you to search within that application based on a variety of different criteria, and then again quickly recover that data much quicker than you might be able to compared to the native capabilities. I just want to close out this portion of the presentation. Karinne's going to give us a live dangerous demo. So we'll see how that, hopefully, fingers crossed, that works out. But to wrap this section up, the solution we're talking about here is Veeam Backup for Office 365. This is all about eliminating the risk of losing access to the data, whether SharePoint, online, Exchange, OneDrive for Business, or Teams, and really allowing for a variety of different restore options, as we mentioned, and really protecting that data from a variety of vulnerabilities, whether data loss vulnerabilities like security threats and retention policy gaps and other things. And really, if you have legal and compliance concerns as well, just being able to quickly search and find data for your legal or compliance officer. And lastly, LA has been kind enough to provide a variety of quotes. You can't beat Veeam for simple, reliable, affordable data protection, and it's very user-friendly. So even if you're not an IT admin like myself, you can very quickly and easily pick up this product and start running enterprise backups. So with that, I think we'll turn it over to Karinne, who is going to run us through that live demo.
I think it's important to say we did not pay him to say that quote. That was straight from him when we asked him, could you give us some feedback about how you feel about the product? And let the lab refresh here. Hopefully, I still have the connection. If not, it looks like it wants me to sign back in real quick and accept the thing. And this is where Edward's heart sinks when I insist on doing live dangerous demos in the infrastructure. Let's see here.
Okay, this is where we pray to the demo gods.
I'm gonna, yeah. I want to be that person that says, I swear this never happens.
Right.
Alright. So I think my lab's gone down. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch labs real quick here, and it's kind of important to note this is my on-prem lab. We've been doing some migrations in the on-prem environment. I'm going to actually just kick off my VBO or VBO on the Azure side itself. So I've deployed this directly from Azure, and I just have a connection. I download an RDP file and I go, and it looks like I already had one in there. Ah! Let's connect in. Perfect. And we'll launch the software here. And connect. And there we go. Now I'm going to go ahead and get the Explorers launched here. And then I'm going to get something to restore by deleting something directly inside the Teams environment. So I'm going to come over to Teams and get Teams running in the background as well. And just to take a quick look at the console, all of our backup software consoles have the same look and feel for the on-prem deployment. You have your backup infrastructure. Down here you have your repositories, your proxies. You do not have to deploy additional proxies and repositories to get started. I do because I like adding in an additional type of object storage and sending my data off to that object storage. But you don't need to. And then creating a backup scope within our software is super easy. You can even use Microsoft 365 groups. You can add in the entire organization, and I have a catch-all group for all of the teams in my organization by selecting my entire organization and just having teams selected here on the back end. I have individual sites also selected to make sure they get backed up, and then individual users as well. And then I have a dynamic exclude group. So I have an Office 365 dynamic group that I have users sent to that I never want to have backed up for one reason or another. I think mostly for compliance in this case. And let's get in here and we'll delete something over here from site documents and files. And just for fun, let's do a couple. We'll get rid of the OSI model, and how about the blocked ports, and we'll delete them directly from here. Delete, and let that go. Now, to kick off with our Restore Explorers that I just launched, this is the Exchange Restore Explorer, which looks a lot like you logged into Outlook, and you can see all of your email boxes, your sent, your items, your calendars, your contacts. Even your task and sticky notes are in here if you have sticky notes as well. And you're able to restore any of the data from an entire mailbox all the way down to these individual files or an attachment to that file, and export as well. SharePoint has the same look and feel where you're able to come in here and take a look at the data for everything, but you see sub-size content, exactly what you'd expect to see if you went to SharePoint Online. We won't get too much into OneDrive because OneDrive's not as visually appealing because it's just a folder that has your subfolders just like a file explorer itself. And you can see how the Microsoft chat files get backed up, so all of the files that were conversations between two people, they're right in here as well. Now to highlight a couple extra features over here on the team side, we're going to go ahead and do a file search. And we're going to do by name, and it's going to contain something. And it was OSI, I remembered, was the one, and we'll search. Now, if I have multiple repositories in my infrastructure, it will search across all of those repositories, especially if you're running a hybrid environment. This is important because you may not know if it was backed up on the one tenant, the other tenant, multiple tenants in the organization. And I can restore directly from here if I want to. One of my favorite features is actually the send to option. The send to option will allow you to send an email out to an end user with the file attached to it. But we'll open up the item location because we know we got multiple to restore here. We'll do the blocked ports and the OSI, and I just did a control click and I was able to select both of those files for restore. It's going to give me a additional device logon because I'm using an application group in order to do this restore. And we'll see here and continue. It just had me log in with my administrator account that has the ability to restore, and it used the VEEAM SERP that I created for this console. It'll come back to this console and say you're authenticated. You can either restore all of the changed missing items if I selected everything in that list, or restore the latest version. Latest version could be nice. If you get a request to restore, say, a site document that you know has been updated probably a few hundred times, and they don't want to wait to get it back, they want it right now, you could just do the latest version because you've already selected the right version. And we can take a look at the success report. If I had multiples on here for, like, I selected that entire list and tried to restore it, it would show me that some of the files might have been skipped because they already exist and I'm only restoring the change or missing items in this particular case. And we'll see if we can get this to refresh pretty immediately. And we already have these files back, and they're not just back to the original location, they're back with that original metadata. So I see the September 3rd and the May 1 for October 7, 2020. And we can make sure that they open properly, which we have the OSI model and cat form here. And then we can check out this block port, which is for netcats. And everything is back the way we expected. And we'll come back here.
Looks like we have just 1 minute left, so this is perfect.
So QR codes.
Yes, QR scanners. Get those QR scanners ready this last minute, please. Go ahead and snap the QR here for our M365 backup guide by VEEAM. We will be giving you a lot more details than what we're able to share today. And on the next slide, we have our download. So take a free 30-day trial, see for yourself. And we definitely encourage you to take this free 30-day trial for the full capabilities. And with that, we'll definitely take any questions in the booth. So please stop by the VEEAM booth, and we'd love to talk to you. So thanks for your attention today. We're very proud to be another lead sponsor for this event, and we really, really appreciate the attendance today.
Thanks again.
Take care.
Edward
On
and
time with
Karinne, we
technical
appreciate you
difficulties.
presenting. And for
Thank you,
also
Greg.
partnering with us at this event.
Thanks for having us.